awesome. But despite the fact that I was pretty proud and arrogant at that point in my life, or some people might just have called it self-confidence, there was also a part of me that desperately wanted to follow Jesus. And I was compelled, there was something about Jesus that I just wanted to follow after. So, but I couldn't figure out this idea of humility, what it actually looked like, because my plan was I wanted to be a leader, right? And I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and I couldn't understand, I've never met a humble fighter pilot, so I'm not sure how that will work out. So I had the opportunity, I guess my second year in college, I had a group of guys that I kind of hung out with, and we had the opportunity to do a Bible study on a particular biblical character, and studying this character and the letter that he eventually wrote really helped bring about some clarity in my own life about this idea of what is humility even. And so I wanted to, since I believe stories are a pretty powerful way to communicate, I wanted to use the story of this person this morning to illustrate that. So when we first meet this character, his name is Simon, and he's doing what he spent a lot of his life doing. He's fishing on the Sea of Galilee. And I actually had the opportunity a couple years ago to go to Israel and see the Sea of Galilee, which is actually a large lake. But this is kind of what it looks like. Beautiful place. And this is actually taken from the Mount of Beatitudes, where they think Jesus gave the Sermon on the Mount. It's kind of looking down on the Sea of Galilee. So Simon and his brother Andrew are there by the Sea of Galilee. And if we could put the first scripture up there. It says, as Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. And at once they left their nets and followed him. So the first thing I just wanted to point out about Simon is that he's an ordinary guy. He's a fisherman, so a little rough around the edges, perhaps. And I think sometimes we get this idea in church that the disciples or the apostles are somehow these super spiritual uber saints that are floating around on clouds. And so I want to point out that he's a normal guy, just like you and me, with all the struggles that we have, and he's a fisherman. So the next scene we see out of Simon's life that I'd like to draw your attention to is the disciples are out in a boat on the Sea of Galilee, far away from shore, and they see someone walking toward them on water, which, does anybody think that is a little weird to see someone walking on water? So of course, they're freaked out, right? But the exchange here is very interesting to me. So we could put Peter sees this person, and they realize, hey, maybe it's Jesus. And so Peter says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. And Jesus says, come. So Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. At the beginning of his scene, he cried out, Lord, save me. So what I kind of want to just point out here is, the rest of the dudes in the boat are scared, right? As you would be if you saw someone walking to you on the water. But not Peter. Peter decides it would be a good idea to go walk on water. So he's like rolling up his pant legs or hiking up his man dress, whatever they wore back then, and stepping out onto the water. And there's a part of me that says, wow, that guy has some self-confidence going on or something. So people have written entire books about that exchange, but what I really wanted to point out was just the fact that he is sort of impulsive or brash. He's the guy who gets out of the boat. So the next time we see Simon is at a place called Caesarea Philippi, which is a little bit north of the Sea of Galilee. And they're there, and Jesus comes to the disciples and he says, who do people say the Son of Man is? And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. And then Jesus puts them on the spot and says, but what about you? He asked, who do you say that I am? And the first guy to open his mouth, guess who it is? It's Simon. And he says, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Which of course it's great that he recognized that. But what I want to point out is, once again, he's the first guy to open his mouth. He has this boldness about himself. So, in fact, this is a place where Jesus changes this man's name from Simon to Peter, which means the rock. So now I want to jump to the Last Supper, and that's what it's commonly come to be known as. So the disciples, this is right before Jesus is going to be crucified, and they're celebrating a Jewish festival known as Passover. So they're all up in what they call the upper room, and Jesus is kind of explaining to them what's going to happen, what the course of events is about to occur. And Jesus says to the disciples, "This very night you will all fall away on account of me. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." And Peter, first to open his mouth, replied, "Even if all fall away on account of you, I never will." And Jesus responds, "Truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. But Peter reasserts himself and says, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the other disciples said the same thing, following Peter's lead. So, a few hours after this occurs, they're in a place called the Garden of Gethsemane, and this is where Jesus, if you're familiar with the story, is praying, and he's actually sweating blood, and his disciples are there with him, and eventually a crowd comes, and they come to take Jesus away. And Peter's reaction, he pulls out a sword, and he chops this dude's ear off of the side of his head. And again, bold, brash, confident Peter. So the crowd, leads Jesus away. Jesus heals the guy's ear, and they lead Jesus off to the high priest's house to, eventually have him executed. And so Peter's kind of following from a distance, and eventually they get to the courtyard of the high priest's house, and this is what happens next. So now Peter was sitting out in the courtyard, and a servant girl came to him and said, "You also were with Jesus of Galilee," she said. But he denied it before them all. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. Then he went out to the gateway, where another servant girl saw him and said to the people there, "This fellow was with Jesus of Nazareth." He denied it again, this time with an oath, "I don't know the man." After a little while, those standing there went up to Peter and said, "Surely you were one of them. Your accent gives you away." Then he began to call down curses, and he swore to them, "I don't know the man." And immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the words Jesus had spoken, "Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times." And he went outside, and he wept bitterly. So there's bold, brash, confident Peter, and denies Jesus to 2 little girls, and then loses his mind essentially, starts cussing and calling down curses. And then what I want you to zero in on is that Peter went outside, and it says he wept bitterly. Peter is utterly broken in this moment. Confident, brash, impulsive Peter is crying uncontrollably in the courtyard of the high priest.